Chair, before we call the meeting to order, we need to take care of administering the oath of office. And to do that, we've got former council member, former General Sessions Judge Mike Jamison. He represented the district where we sit now from 03 to 11. When the stadium we're in now is a new one. And I know Mike, as a former council member for this district, has had a lot of interest in the East Bank. And I'm glad that he's offering time today to administer the oath of office.
Good morning, everyone. If you'll please rise and raise your right hand, repeat after me. This is broken down into 5-word segments, so it's not a memory test. I state your name. I, do solemnly swear. That I will perform with fidelity. The duties of the office. To which I have been appointed. And which I am about to assume. I do solemnly swear. To support the constitutions. Of the state of Tennessee. And of the United States. And to faithfully perform. The duties of the office. Of the East Bank Development Authority members. For Davidson County, Tennessee. Congratulations, you are now duly appointed members of the East Bank Development Authority. Thank you.
And we've got a little oath document that we'll ask you to sign.
Their names.
Thank you, Mr. Mendez. So have we called the meeting to order? Okay. We would like to call the meeting to order now. Thank you. And our first agenda item is the public comment period pursuant to Tennessee Open Meetings Act, Tennessee Code annotated section 844-101. Pursuant to that state law, we will have anyone in the public who would like to make comments is welcome to address the board. Is there anybody here who would like to do that? You have 2 minutes each if anybody wants to speak. All right. Not seeing anyone, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is to approve the minutes for the January 22nd East Bank Development Board.
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, those are approved. Moving on to number 4, consideration of the bylaws. Y'all should have received a copy of the bylaws. I worked on that pursuant to y'all's vote last meeting, worked on that with Metro Legal to come up with some proposed bylaws. As we discussed at the last meeting, these are just very general. We may amend them at a later date if we determine that that's necessary. But has everybody had a chance to review those and prepare to vote? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next agenda item is to select the legal counsel. And again, pursuant to y'all's vote at the last meeting, I worked with Metro Legal with Mr. Mendez, did some research and spoke to a few different attorneys as we sought legal counsel for our board. And I have come up with a recommendation for Saul Solomon and Rita Roberts Turner, both of whom are here from the firm Klein Solomon Mills. Saul and Rita both have significant experience in the public and private sectors. Saul has worked as a public defender, general counsel for Bridgestone Americas. He was the director of the Metropolitan Department of Law, interim executive director of MDHA, and continues to serve as their legal counsel. He's also represented the city of Clarksville and the Industrial Development Board of Clarksville, as well as MNAA. So he's got a lot of experience with advising boards, serving in government and private capacity. Rita Roberts Turner similarly has significant experience in public and private sectors. She also worked in the public defender's office and also worked in the Metropolitan Department of Law. She was chief of staff for former Mayor Carl Dean, head of Metro Human Resources, and WeGo Public Transit. She worked for them as well. She's now at Klein Solomon Mills with focusing on employment law and government relations. So both of them have significant experience in public and private sector. I thought it would be prudent to recommend both of them. I've spoken to both of them. They can tag team, work together. If we ever do have both of them together, they have agreed not to charge us for two attorneys at once. So we're getting two for the price of one, which is a good deal. So that's their background. If you'll have any questions, I'm sure they can answer them, or I can answer them if I know the answer.
I'd like to make a motion to approve, which is with a slight comment. I worked with Mr. Solomon at MDHA, and he was a strong voice of reason, and always had the good support for the board, and was a great understanding of the public sector, especially Davidson County. So I think he'd be a great choice. Sorry, I don't know Rita, but I'm sure Saul will keep you, running the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you.
And is there a second?
Second.
And I should make one more point. This, and you may need to amend your motion. This is specifically for the intergovernmental agreement. We talked about getting counsel to advise us specifically for the intergovernmental agreement, and then we may need to amend that to select either them or someone else after that. But wanted to go ahead and get someone specifically for that. So you
Just
need
the
to-
general counsel, right?
general counsel for purposes of getting the intergovernmental agreement worked out, and then we will move after that. We can consider them for future, but so you may need to amend your motion to clarify that.
Accordingly, yeah. I'll just do it as per what you just said.
And can you re-second it? Okay, great. Is there all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. Next is to select a vice chair. Next agenda item is to select a vice chair. So would open that to any volunteers or suggestions if anybody is interested in that or has somebody in mind for that.
I'll nominate Jimmy Granberry, if he'll take it.
Mr. Granby, are you willing to serve as vice chair? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you. And next agenda item is.
Only because you're an Ole Miss graduate.
I'll
Just for-
take it.
just for
I'll
the
take
record.
it. We got two Ole Miss grads leading the board, so we're bound to
I'm
be
not sure that's
successful.
good.
Next, Mr. Mendez, CEO update is our next agenda item.
Thanks, Chair. The update, you all will recall that under the enabling legislation, the mayor's got the authority to select the initial CEO. Our interview process is ongoing. I think I told you when we were here last that we thought we'd get it done by the beginning of March. And I'm going to have to report a little slide on that. We're hoping to have it done by the end of March. And so the process is ongoing. We really would like somebody in place to comment on the intergovernmental agreement before you guys are asked to make a final vote on it. So that process is ongoing.
Thank you. Are there any questions on that?
Yeah, real quick, Bob. What are the sort of the basic job description? Is it going to be comparable to what Doug does at the airport, or what's the kind of the job description?
Yeah, the way we're describing it is there's several things that we need that sort of a tough combination to find. One, unlike any authority we've ever started up in Metro, this is a pure startup. Really, there's, we plan on having 2 employees, Ben York and Anna Grider, come over from Metro to the authority. But beyond that, the authority's at its infancy. And so the person needs to have leadership skills appropriate for building an organization from scratch. While it's a little boring to most folks, the biggest job for the East Bank is to make a bunch of infrastructure that doesn't exist come into existence. hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure. And so the person doesn't necessarily have to be an engineer, but they can't be, what I've been saying, they can't be allergic to talking about infrastructure. They have to be comfortable guiding a team that is deep in the weeds on complex infrastructure challenges. The third thing is there has to be an alignment with the East Bank vision document that planning came up with a couple of years ago. The development deal, which we'll talk more about later today, is designed to implement the vision document. And so we want to make sure the person is aligned with that vision. We're not interested in reworking that or starting from scratch on vision. And then finally, government's a complex bureaucracy, and that comes with good things and bad things. The person needs to be able to have some demonstrated ability to work their way around complex government structures. If they have experience with metro government structures, better. But just being convincing that they've got the skill set to handle that is helpful. And, I think we could all go back in our memory banks 25 years. Sometimes Metro's had leadership that's really good at working around government structures, and sometimes there's places where we haven't done as good a job about that. So those are the four things: the leadership, especially with startup, the infrastructure piece, the alignment with vision, and the ability to work through complex government structures.
Are there any other questions? And before we move on to the next agenda item, I need to go back to number 5 under legal counsel. I need the board's approval to sign the engagement letter on behalf of the board. So if we could have a motion to that effect as well.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.
And Emily, on that, can somebody send us that engagement letter?
Absolutely. I've got a copy here. I can show it to you, and I can also email it to you. Moving on, let me get that.
Well, and Chair, typically when we want to disseminate things, we'll have the staff
Okay.
email it to everybody, so we don't have.
I've got a hard copy, and I will also email you all copies so you can get it to everybody. Thank you. Moving on now to the overview of the recommended board training.
I'm going to be very brief, and the conclusion is that none of the trainings that Metro offers to regular board and commission members are requirements for you. Metro offers some things specific, sort of a condensed version of trainings to board and commission members. This board is a totally separate legal entity, so you're not covered by the executive order that mandates it for other boards and commissions. If you're interested, Metro does offer things like cyber awareness and sexual harassment training, drug-free workplace. If you happen to be interested in any of those things, let me know and I will arrange them for you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Any questions on that? Next agenda item, the vision plan informational session. So this is the point where we will move on from business to information and training. So, Ms. Greider, are you going to be leading that? Okay, thank you.
And I have some slides to share as well. Good morning, board. Thank you for the time this morning. I'm Anna Greider. I've been with Metro in the planning department for the last almost 9 years now, and had the opportunity to lead the Imagine East Bank Vision Plan through 2021 and 2022, and have stayed on working on its implementation. And so I'm going to give just a very high-level overview today. Happy to answer any questions at the end, but also there might be things you really want to dive into in future meetings, and be glad to do that, because this is really going to just touch the surface of our work. So next slide, please. Oh, I have the clicker. Okay, so what is Imagine East Bank? So this was one of the largest and most complex planning studies that we've undertaken in Nashville, probably second only to Nashville Next, our comprehensive plan. It was 21 months of public engagement, very intense and extensive technical analysis and urban design inquiry, looking at how we bring a major piece of our city's core to life, starting primarily with its public spaces, emphasizing the public systems like streets, open space, greenways, and development of land that Metro specifically owns. The whole plan is shaped by 4 vision plan concepts, which were established by the community, and I'll hit on each of these: equity and affordability, mobility, resiliency, and building neighborhoods. And the plan was adopted in October of 2022. So, next slide. So a vision plan is, it's important to kind of understand what the vision plan is and what it isn't. So it's a reflection of community priorities, and it's built on both existing plans and policies that were already in place and extensive research and analysis that we did during its development. It provides guidance for rezoning requests within the East Bank, and the foundation for design-based zoning, which is what was recently adopted for the first 30 acres of Metro-owned land with the expansion of the downtown code. And it's a guide for us to use for decisions for public and private investment. It's not detailed engineering and design plans. That's the phase we're in now in terms of implementation. It's not rezoning on its own, and it's not a financing mechanism, but it is the vision and the groundwork for creating the community that we heard Nashvillians want on the East Bank.
Could you
Define design-based zoning.
Yes, all right, I'll do my best. So traditional zoning is based on acreage and what you can build within that and land use. So it's typically either commercial, residential, mixed use. Design-based zoning is a form-based code, meaning it is more about the look and feel of the building and the massing and the materials than it is about the use. And so predominantly we have that in downtown to encourage a mix of uses. And so that extension of the downtown code to the East Bank meant that it has the similar but different powers because the East Bank is unique. And so it's not just a repetition of what is allowed downtown, but we were able to shape its form, which it gets into detailed things like the setback from the street, the step back of a building, the public spaces allowed around it. So it's more about the look and feel of the building is design-based rather than you can have a commercial building here and it has to take up this much of the lot. Is that helpful? Okay. Okay. So for the East Bank to become a place of new neighborhoods for Nashville, it needs to reestablish itself within the city's fabric, both in physical form as well as socially, culturally, and economically. And the East Bank today has a lot of challenges, and this slide kind of is a picture of some of those. It's a really contradictory place because it's both on the river, but that river has very steep and overgrown riverbanks that hide the river. When you're on the East Bank, you can't really find the river. And it's in the heart of our city, right across from downtown, but has yet to really benefit and see the type of development that we have seen there. It's adjacent to East Nashville, one of our really thriving neighborhoods, and yet until recently has had no residents. It's connected to the interstates and our river bridges, but also disconnected by them. So fundamental, big pieces of infrastructure and history and topography that have created kind of an island for the East Bank. And this is some of the challenges that we'll be grappling with as the East Bank evolves.
Backing up to Mr. Cato's question, when you transfer the downtown code to the form-based code, where did parking fall into that conversation?
So parking is, we didn't change it really from what the downtown code.
So zero, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, zero required. Yeah. So impetus for the plan, important to C because it's relevant for what we've been working on since its adoption. And I'll just highlight a couple of these. But at the time, 2020, when I was first beginning this work, there was a lot of public interest in creating a vision for the East Bank, a lot of development pressure. There's already existing policy and zoning that supports high density over here, but the infrastructure is really inadequate to support that type of development. And we needed to take a close look at flooding and resiliency. And then there was a great community desire to have more of a relationship with the river. We're a city on a river, but we haven't fully embraced that, especially not on the East Bank. So a couple of these to highlight the development pressure. We knew as a planning department that a few of the things that were coming to the East Bank, so the Oracle in 2021, River North, which is the area you see in the more pink color, already has an urban design overlay and entitlements for mixed use. You can go over there now, and there's 2 apartment buildings built and a Shake Shack and some other commercial uses coming. And so we knew that that was going to happen in River North. We also knew the Titans were interested in exploring a new stadium. And and then Station East, which is the former truck stop, is an 18-acre site, which was going through rezoning in 2021 to allow up to 30 stories of development. And so we knew as a planning department there was a lot of things coming, and that in order for us not to stress the already inadequate infrastructure, we needed to plan for how this place can develop, and so that those developments can happen in a way that's accessible for all and that the infrastructure can withstand it. And the infrastructure is inadequate, is the summary. The East Bank is designed for cars, but it doesn't even really do that particularly well because it's a series of disconnected streets, a lot of surface parking lots that exacerbate environmental vulnerabilities over here. And underneath all of this is a network of utilities that is only sized to handle current development and not anything above what is currently here. And so a lot of deep issues to deal with. Alongside the infrastructure, we have significant large-scale infrastructure that's in the way of creating connected streets. So James Robertson Parkway, due to its elevated landing on the East Bank, really is a barrier to creating the connected streets that are needed to make this place function well. And those are the type of things that we're working on now, is addressing how to bring what was planned in the vision plan to life through addressing things like how do we get James Robertson lowered to grade, similar to how Woodland Street lands, in order to allow a boulevard and other streets and greenways to come all the way through the East Bank up to River North. So meaningful public engagement is foundational for the success of any plan. And imagine East Bank represents 21 months of effort to engage as many Nashvillians as possible to understand their experiences and craft a collaborative vision for the East Bank. And these conversations directly shaped the recommendations presented in the vision plan. We wanted this to be forward-thinking, information-led, community-led vision for the East Bank. And so those 4 priorities emerged during the engagement process that convey the community's objectives for the East Bank and provide the framework for the vision. Safe and simple multimodal connections, equitable and affordable East Bank, respect for the river, and neighborhoods for Nashvillians. At no point in all of the engagement we did, which was extensive, did we receive feedback that the East Bank in its current condition is a value for the city and that we shouldn't do anything. So we had good direction, good motivation. I'm just going to hit a couple of slides on each of the 4 vision plan components. Equity and affordability is woven throughout the entire vision plan, but also has a focus in this chapter. And its multi-pronged approach covering access to jobs, attainability in housing and amenities, safety, multimodal transportation. And if you get into the plan, I've just pulled a page from the chapter to highlight. So this one is addressing several strategies for housing diversity and attainability, including housing benchmarks for the first phase of development on Metro-owned land, which Bob will touch on in more detail when he presents next on the Master Development Agreement with Fallon. The safe and simple multimodal connections, it was about that was with an emphasis on pedestrians, cyclists, transit users. So creating and showing how we can establish comprehensive mobility networks that serve all of those users, with the priority on pedestrians, transit riders, and cyclists. And so this chapter contains pretty detailed street grids, taking each of those modes and then knitting them together into a broader network. Includes Nashville's first dedicated bus rapid transit line for the East Bank Boulevard, which is that primary north-south street. Has a robust network of dedicated and protected bike lanes on the majority of the streets and looks at filling gaps in our greenway system. We identified conceptual placement and sections for these networks and are now working with all the relevant agencies to get these in place, which includes things like right-of-way acquisition and detailed engineering and design plans for those streets. So respect for the river couples the dual priorities that we heard from the community, which was about resiliency and handling flooding, as well as a greater access to the river, not necessarily getting in the river, but greater access to be next to the water, with a development of greenway, riverfront park spaces, opportunities to get closer to that water. And so this chapter has a lot of detailed diagrams and analysis looking at linking the environmental strategy of flood resiliency and stormwater management with the creation of vibrant parks and open spaces and greenways, so that there's both a dual function. It's called performative landscapes, where you have the opportunity when it's not flooding and the river's not high to enjoy that green space, and then when the river is high and there's a flooding event, it's able to flood without impacting people and property. And then the fourth one was neighborhoods for Nashvillians. We heard a lot of feedback about creating places on the East Bank for Nashvillians, not just for tourists. And that includes things like family-friendly destinations and park spaces, et cetera. And so this chapter lays out the building blocks for how you can establish neighborhoods that give you safe and comfortable access to goods and resources and jobs and housing, and minimizes those big man-made super scale obstacles like the interstate and our river bridges. And so for this, we divided the East Bank into 4 different neighborhoods and have objectives and guidelines for the development of buildings and streetscapes and outdoor spaces. And we use this as foundational for that central waterfront area, which involves 130 acres of Metro-owned land, 30 of which are part of the Fallon Development Agreement that Bob will touch on next. We use the guidance in this chapter to help craft what that zoning should be. And then there are 2 final chapters. I'm not going to touch on them in any detail, but the 8th chapter is the Metro-owned land. That's looking at the 130 acres that Metro owns and the priorities for that space in terms of where we want public space, the types of uses we want to see in that area. And then the 9th chapter is our implementation, and those are things we've been working on since its adoption in 2022, our strategic priorities and next steps. So all of this is a very ambitious vision for entirely new neighborhoods, and will take decades to be fully realized. Along with time and investment, it will take collaboration and leadership from all involved, not least of all this board, to create the East Bank we all desire and bring this vision to life. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
And I've got a question. First off, I went through this over the last week. Fantastic. The document is amazing. I encourage everybody to read this document in detail. So great work. I'm curious, with the timeline of coming around with this and getting it approved in 2022, we're here in 2025. Oracle was in 2021. The stadium's going up now. For the already happening developments that are, going up, or even, you can eat at Shake Shack now, did they already fit into the vision as designed in the vision plan, or there's some circumstances where, because the development happened before the plan, there's going to be some meaningful need to change the overarching plan because, for instance, the boulevard can't go through there now because there's a Shake Shack there, or how have we been able to, while creating the vision, see if it fits in with what's already going up, or is that going to require some changes?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, so the vision plan, I can flip back to the slide that has it, but the vision plan was for everything south of Jefferson Street in terms of detailed vision that we worked on, because we knew that River North already had an urban design overlay, which does contain many of the things that we are interested in seeing for the lower East Bank. And we knew broadly about Cowan Street, its current location, and wanting to use that as the northern terminus, the northern extent of the boulevard. So there wasn't really issues with street network. I'll go to that slide. There we go. And so you can see in the vision plan, it's that area that kind of has just Cowan Street and a greenway is where the Oracle campus is planned. And so we knew that as private property that they were going to come up with their own plan and come up with connectivity within their site. You'll see the proposed pedestrian bridge that links over to Germantown. And so there have been some tweaks that we've made to the urban design overlay language within River North based on what we heard in the vision plan. But it was already in pretty close alignment with what we were wanting to do in the rest of the East Bank. So for now, there's nothing pressing that needs to change in River North to meet the vision. We worked with every single property owner over here on the East Bank to figure out where they were in terms of development. Were they looking to develop? Were they holding on to their property? Were they happy and just want to function as is? And so the property owners in River North were a part of those conversations as well. And so we felt like we understood what they were aiming for, and they understood what we were laying with our public infrastructure.
Sounds like you're doing a lot of engineering work. Is there a firm already employed by the Planning Commission that y'all are working with?
Yeah, so the East Bank team hired HDR as our program managers back in 2023. Getting my years confused. Towards the end of 2023. And they have a number of sub-consultants, including, and they do engineering themselves, but also have sub-consultant engineers. And then NDOT hired an engineering firm specifically to work on the boulevard. And so we have engineers working on that. We have Kimley Horn, who provided a utility master plan for the central waterfront and 30% design plans for that infrastructure, who used sub-consultants like Sherwood Design Engineers, who are a flood resiliency and stormwater group. And so there's been multiple engineering groups that have been doing work and will continue to do work for us.
And will those contracts move over to the East Bank Authority under the new CEO?
That's the intention.
Okay.
Question I hear a lot from just friends in the community, who, especially those who were here in 2010. What percentage of the East Bank was underwater in 2010? And I know you touched a little bit on, respect for the river, including flood mitigation, but just what are we doing now in the event?
Yeah. So that is 2010 flood is still fresh in many people's minds, and a lot of the East Bank was underwater in 2010. So we, during the vision plan process, worked with Metro Water and the Army Corps of Engineers, who does all the flood modeling for us, to look at if we were to develop the East Bank as envisioned, what would that do to the river and the floodplain? And the modeling surprisingly showed that it would have a really negligible impact on the river. But we know that we want to be able to deal with those increased climate events. And so the two-pronged strategy that is primarily laid out in the vision plan is one, make room for the river, which is exploring where we can, laying back the river bank and softening the steepness of the banks to allow the river to expand when it needs to. And so this is a graphic that's trying to show how that park that's envisioned in front of the new stadium coming down towards the river will perform by slowing and storing water underneath the park. And then as you got closer to the river, it kind of opened up into a space that had maybe boardwalks and things, but in a flooding event, they could flood. So laying back the riverbank is one, and then the other is a district-wide stormwater management strategy. So rather than in the rest of Nashville, you have to manage your own stormwater on each individual parcel. Because of Metro's ownership of many parcels, we worked with Metro Water to establish a district-wide strategy. And so the district can drain to a central, larger public space rather than individually. And so it can it can allow smaller parcels to develop while also being treated in the district. And so we have legislation through council that established that special district for the East Bank. And so it's a new process for Nashville to work in this way, but makes sense for the East Bank, given its constraints and opportunities to have larger district management functions. So those are two of the main things. I do think if this body is interested and wants to get into more detail, we absolutely should touch on that and some of the other strategies. But those are the two core approaches. Yeah.
Hey, Ann.
Hey.
You went through the slide pretty quick, but I seen a slide where it was the affordable housing and it had 60, it had the breakdowns.
Yep.
I know the AMI raises every year, and it's at like almost $107,000 a year right now. And that's been one of the biggest things in the community, in the city. Like, when we talk about affordable housing, we need to figure out a way to get truly affordable housing for the people in the city who build up Nashville. And just trying to see that 60% AMI, that's still unreasonable for certain people in the city of Nashville. So just trying to figure out the percentage of the housing that are going to be in that 20 to 40% and things of that nature moving forward. So,
yeah, and we've been able to negotiate that through the master development agreement, which Bob will touch on next in detail for the first 30 acres and establish that 99-year lease affordability. The vision plan set benchmarks based on the Affordable Housing Task Force and some dedicated affordable housing community meetings that we had. And so that's what's in there right now, showing kind of the baseline goals that were set during that time. But as each as Metro has the opportunity to negotiate affordable housing with each development on its property, the negotiations will change that's why it says phase one, because by the time other buildings are coming through, we might be in phase two of the East Bank development, and the goals and standards will have changed. And so that's why it's only established for the first one, and that we used as our baseline for negotiations with Fallon.
Another question. Now that the mayor's transit plan has passed, my general knowledge, it seems like it dovetails pretty well with what was already thought here, but are there any notable changes that need to be made to the vision to dovetail with the priorities of the transit plan?
Not, I mean, we need to get into more detail on that, but not primarily. A lot of the transit plan includes the vision, essentially. And so most of what we cover in the vision plan relates to establishing the North-South Boulevard, which would be a new connection to KVB from Dickerson and Gallatin, which feels like a natural new North-South connection that we need on the east side. And then improvements to Shelby, KVB are planned in Choose How You Move, but also fit in with what we envision for the East Bank. And then James Robertson Parkway, Woodland Street, Jefferson Street, all of our major east-west streets that we have in the vision for having bike lanes and better sidewalks and more accessibility. We think it's all going to dovetail nicely. There's obviously like much more detailed conversations we need to get into as that process moves forward. But the vision plan was definitely included in the transit plan in terms of how we envision this area. So we think we're in good shape. More to come.
Hey, my question had to do with the downtown code, and it seems like the most recent revision that's happening covers part of the East Bank. Is there a plan for all of the area defined as the East Bank to fall under the downtown code, and kind of what's the timeline there?
Yeah, so we had a lot of discussion in the planning department about how to approach this and felt that we knew the most about this first 30 acres. And so we felt confident that the zoning that we were creating in that subdistrict for the East Bank was appropriate for that first 30 acres. It may be that as Metro releases more land and RFPs for development as property becomes available, that it is just we're just extending what we already have written in zoning. But it might be that by the time you're able to develop some of those other parcels, the city has different priorities or different design direction they want to go in for those properties. And so we didn't want to rezone them at that time without really having a good picture. And so it might be that we do just a flat extension. It might be that we have a East number 2 subdistrict, and that is specifically about properties on the river or properties between James Robertson and Woodland. We just didn't know, so we were kind of taking a more deliberate approach of just doing the 30 acres that we have a greater sense of understanding of what's going to be built.
Are there any other questions? All right.
All right.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Very helpful.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the Fallon Master Development Agreement informational session.
And before I dive into that, just circling back to the 2010 flood question, I want to make sure to emphasize that we're viewing the water issues as like literally the number one thing of any conversation on the East Bank, because the life safety issues for the future are literally paramount. We have worked closely with the Corps of Engineers to understand exactly how the river behaves over there, over here, I guess, and are trying to layer as many policies, mechanisms, physical attributes as we can to make sure that we're building a safe environment over here. Let's see here. So Anna mentioned that the master plan was adopted by the Metropolitan Commission toward the end of 22, and then the Cooper administration launched an RFP process to find a master developer for the first 30 acres on the East Bank, and that RFP process wrapped up right at the end, like literally at the end of Mayor Cooper's term. And so when Mayor O'Connell came in office, one of our first orders of business was Mayor O'Connell, meet the Fallon Company, the winners of the RFP process. Fallon Company, here's the new mayor. And we dove into getting that agreement from, saying hi, hello, how are you, at the beginning of October 23 to developing an agreement that we could take to the council, which passed the council about 6-7 months later in April of 24. And this is a summary of that agreement. This is just out of the East Bank plan showing that the number one priority, and I can't really read my own slides from here, but the priority was to well, the first priority was start working on the Metro-owned land. And so that was what we did. We've talked about it, but here's an image of it. Metro owns this 130 acres. And we talked, I think, briefly last time. This is 2 gulches. The gulch is about 60 acres. This is Nashville Yards we've seen is 20 acres. So this is 6 Nashville Yards. It's a big place, and that's what we started with. Because it's so big, we started with 30 acres in the RFP process. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. For those of you watching on TV, the screen was just adjusted for me, which I really appreciate. The 30 acres, if you want to understand like why these 30 acres, you can see in the light gray the footprint of the current football stadium. So obviously we couldn't build there. And then fundamentally, like a lot of things on the East Bank, this is an infrastructure question. Infrastructure will be available closest to the football stadium first. And along as you get closer to the river, near a couple bridges. So the 30 acres was chosen by proximity to the stadium due to infrastructure availability and staying out of the way of the current footprint for the current stadium and the current Juvenile Justice Center. I talked about this process. This ran through the last year of the Cooper administration. There was a substantial RFP process that sort of feels a little bit like prehistory to me because it happened before I was in the mayor's office. But it was a robust process, and I've talked to the folks involved. They got into a great deal of detail, including multiple rounds of questions to refine what they thought. One of the things that Fallon had going for them is waterfront development in Boston that had water concerns the same way we have water concerns on the East Bank. From the key components of what we need to do from the beginning, we, as I mentioned before, we wanted to build the Imagine East Bank plan. We wanted to focus on the things that Anna mentioned in her presentation. That's the way the RFP was put together. This was the first draft master plan, which at this point is outdated. I think before too much longer, certainly by the end of spring, we'll have it's called a public realm document, which shows in a lot more detail what this area might look like. This is what was part of this is an exhibit from the master development agreement showing basically what we would do with the property and the parcels, which we'll refer to in subsequent slides. You can see are lettered. A is a future transit hub and affordable housing building. B, next to the football stadium, is most likely going to be hotel use. That, if you drive by the stadium right now, that's where the Titans have their construction trailers. So that will be the last part of the new football stadium that the construction gets off of. The trailers will come down last. C on screen right, which is the south side of the stadium, is likely to be a mix of hotel and residential. Parcel G, which is farther to the right of C across Shelby. Again, 30 acres is a lot of space. We're imagining a 300-unit affordable housing building there, and at the top end of that parcel is being reserved for future office space usage closer to the interstate. Right now, I think most of you probably know you can't finance a high-rise office building hardly anywhere in America. The idea is to leave that parcel available for future development. D is likely to be some combination of residential and maybe hotel. I'm going to talk about the balance of hotel and residential later as we go forward. And then parcels E, E1, and F are the farthest off in the future, probably due to infrastructure issues. That infrastructure is farthest into the future. F, Fallon will develop most likely some combination of retail at the ground floor and residential above. E1, somewhere between D and E1, one of them will likely be a hotel and residential, and the rest, I don't think a decision's been made on that. And E is the parcel that in the development agreement is reserved for TPAC if Metro reaches an agreement with TPAC, and if it doesn't, then Fallon will develop that parcel. And there's a timeline set in the development agreement about when the window closes for TPAC. For land uses, when we sat down the first couple meetings with Fallon, like what do we want? What does Metro want? Because of the drive toward neighborhood, the logic was you can't have neighborhood without people, you can't have people without residences. So all the development milestones in the agreement are triggered around delivering residential units. And you can see the outline here. And Mr. Carter, I'll have a little more details about the affordability later on. But just to dip into your question a little bit, you referenced AMI, and for those of you who don't know, that means area median income. For affordable housing experts, talking about defining things in terms of AMI can be a little triggering because AMI, as a matter of federal law, covers all the surrounding counties, and the area median income is higher because it includes surrounding counties than the median income in Davidson County. So Mr. Carter's point is that if you have something that's 80% of AMI, you're doing 80% of the median income, including all of Williamson County and the other surrounding counties. And so it can seem skewed because 80% of area median income is not 80% of Nashville median income. We use area median income because all federal government incentives and tax credits are defined by area median income. And because of that, it experiences it's very difficult. If you talk about Nashville median income, then that doesn't match up with federal tax credits. So one of the things we always have to do, Mr. Carter's right about this, is we have to understand when we say, oh, something's 80% of AMI, that translates into a different level of affordability if you're talking about Nashvillians. And so you'll see what we've tried to do is 80% of AMI for the affordable units is the most expensive that Fallon's committed to do, and then there's a series of units at 60% of AMI, and then some as low as 30% of AMI, trying to get a mix. We always do this mental translation of area versus Nashville median income. The other uses you can see here, there will be a daycare in the first residential building. Every building will have ground floor retail. That's important for the activation and make it have a neighborhood feel. There will be the one parcel I mentioned held for at least 10 years for office. And then we put a cap on the number of hotels, and that's trying to affect this balance of whether it feels like a place for Nashvillians or doesn't. And I would invite all of you to think about if you're standing in the middle of Broadway at 3rd or 4th Avenue, you get a strong sense like, wow, that like. Bravo for the tourism economy. I don't see a lot of Nashvillians here except for the folks working in the bars and restaurants. But if you go over the Gulch, it's high-rise development, and sure, there's tourists around, but there's a definite feel of there's a bunch of Nashvillians living here. They're walking their dogs, they're going to restaurants, they're going to work, they're walking to work. And that difference between the feel and fabric of Broadway versus the Gulch, when we think about the East Bank, the planning department, like this isn't their technical terms. From my perspective, what we're aiming for is we don't want it any more weighted toward tourists than to what you might experience in the Gulch. And if we can get it a little more neighbor, then we've done our job. So the idea by putting a cap on the number of hotels is driving at this idea: can we have a neighborhood for Nashvillians? Milestones. These are the milestones in the agreement. Again, they're all built around delivering residential units. Not listed here is one that's important for you to know, and that is, any development agreement, and those of you who have developed stuff, there's a question about, well, what's the deadline? When do I have to deliver it by? We had a back and forth with Fallon that's worth describing to y'all, where Metro's starting place was, we need, you start by this date, and a bunch of micro deadlines. And Fallon made the point, interest rates, economy, change in politics, like we don't know exactly what it's going to be. We don't want, we prefer to not have a series of micro deadlines. And what we accommodated, the compromise we found was that there's a back end deadline that they have to deliver the housing units by a certain date in order to unlock their right to develop Parcel B, which is the hotel at the north end of the stadium. And so rather than having sticks where they'd be in trouble if they don't meet deadlines, there's a carrot that if they meet the delivery of the residential units, which gets us our neighborhood, then they unlock the potential to build a hotel next to an NFL stadium, that's a nice sized carrot. And if they don't meet the deadline, then that's Metro's to RFP to whomever we want in the future. On the affordable housing, we've got an unprecedented length of affordability of 99 years. When the city started doing affordable housing 20-some years ago with Mayor Purcell, the affordability period was about 5 years. And it's steadily increased, 15, 20, 25 now. This is 99. And I'll tell you, one of the first things I did after it was approved by the council, I asked Fallon why they agreed to 99 years, because we don't know what federal programs are going to exist in 30, 40, 50 years. And really the answer was built around the idea that this is a big enough development adjacent to downtown Nashville, adjacent to an NFL stadium, where they felt like they could deliver on this need and desire for the city and promise 99 years. It shows here that if they build the minimum number of housing units, 1,550, 695 of them would be affordable, which is pushing, I think, 40%. It's a high percentage of affordable units. It's important to mention Metro will be getting its full property taxes on this as the baseline, and we have told them clearly that we're not going to invent new affordable housing programs. We're not going to set new precedents on the delivery of our affordable housing programs. But within the range of our existing affordable housing financing, we'll be happy to support any application they have up to sort of the top end of the range of our existing programs. So we feel pretty good just from economics point of view that we were delivering a high number of affordable units with good levels of affordability for a unprecedented amount of time in a way that doesn't have us promising anything extraordinary or different or new as far as more metro financing at the back end when it comes to actually putting the buildings together and financing them. This is a slide shown to the Metro Council about a year ago. It's dense. It was intended to be dense to show a couple things. One, the intense amount of infrastructure needs for the immediate area. And it was intended to show what the relative responsibilities that the different parties were agreeing to take on. For Fallon, they committed to the top several items there. There's a couple things that are Metro's responsibility that you'll see are relatively lower price tags. And then in the non-binding MOU that we did with TPAC that was before the council at the same time, these are the things that TPAC committed to in the non-binding MOU. This is what was shown to the council before they voted on both the Fallon deal and the TPAC non-binding MOU.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
It may be premature for this, but depending on what happens with the agreement with TPAC, do we have a plan B for that infrastructure?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you what the development agreement says, and then how I anticipate that would play out. And first of all, we'd rather have TPAC there.
Of course.
We'd like to work something out with them. However, as TPAC knows, as Fallon knows, we did what if it before the agreements went to the council. And the what if between Fallon and Metro is if the TPAC deal falters and doesn't go from non-binding MOU to actual deal, that Metro and Fallon agree to negotiate it later, is what we agreed to. From Metro's perspective, like, those top four lines show what we expect the developer to do, and the lines for what the non-binding MOU said with TPAC shows what Metro expects a developer to do. If somebody wants to develop the most valuable real estate in Nashville, we expect them to pick up the infrastructure in the immediate surrounding area. But the technical agreement was we agreed to work on it later. And really, it was too hypothetical to get into the weeds. And frankly, we were assuming we'd get to the finish line, and hopefully we still do.
Bob, one question on those infrastructure line items, like, when Fallon's responsible for the first line, is that East Bank Boulevard, is that the road, the water, the other, what goes into a utility cost or an infrastructure cost for these segments? Is it everything you think of as infrastructure, or should we understand that it's a subset of everything?
I think everything is a good proxy. Everybody who was working on this was more in the weeds than you guys are just getting it like a fire hose. I'll back up a couple slides. If you look, the East Bank Boulevard goes shown here between parcels D and E1. And so the piece of the boulevard that we were talking about on that infrastructure slide is the piece that literally goes from between parcels D, E1, and F, and that's it. And that would be Fallon's responsibility because they've got the buildings on either side of that. Okay, the lease terms. It's a 99-year lease for the 30 acres of Metro land. Metro continues to own the land. There is a fair market value rent based on appraisal. The appraisal process is only at the beginning right now. It's a complex process where the fair market value based on expected land use and the downtown code is figured out now, and then there's a mechanism to increase that by a certain percentage each year until ground is broken, and then when a building's ready to go, the rent price would be fixed, and we negotiated what the annual increase in rent is over time. We think it approximates, we think it is market value. In addition to the annual rent, we've got a participation rent agreement, which is also unprecedented in Metro deals, where every time one of the buildings, and there could be a dozen buildings, maybe plus or minus a few, that get built by Fallon, every time a building changes hands or there's a cash out refinancing of the building by ownership, Metro will get 1% of the gross of that. We tried really hard to, time will tell, but we basically tried to imagine if the most unscrupulous private equity people in America came to be an owner, how would they try to screw us on the participation rent, and tried to draft the agreement so it could be bulletproof and we'd get the participation rent every time buildings changes hand. Our downtown buildings change hands on average 7-15 years. So over 100 years, 12 buildings plus or minus change hands maybe 10 times each, 7 times each. This is a nice little add-on for Metro along the way in terms of dollars. I would mention also full property taxes are being paid on all these, even though it's Metro-owned land, so it's government-owned land. In Tennessee, any lease over 50 years, if it's leased by government to a private entity, property taxes apply. So we'll be collecting property taxes on these properties also. Workforce development, these are, one of the things in the vision plan, I think the community wants generally, is one of the ways for Nashvillians to benefit from this, from the intensity of development, is to have people be able to work on the job site and pick up skills that can be used in the future to provide for themselves and their family. There's a list of programs that Fallon is going to participate in to hopefully help us as a city engage in workforce development. Wage theft prevention. There's a lot of words here. I would paraphrase it as there's pretty strong protections under federal law for wage theft prevention. All of those are going to apply, all the normal rules. Fallon has told us that they're happy to have on site a process where if there's a sub of a sub of a sub who feels like there's wage theft going on, it's going to be an easy way to report it where Fallon knows about it immediately without having to go through different levels of contractors, and they're committed to stamping that out quickly if it happens. Construction safety, again, this is a list of different construction safety items. I will note I think Fallon is still planning to use Turner Construction, who's working on the football stadium deal also. I've been over there, and you get the sense that safety is a top concern, and I've been able to see some information about the level of safety at the stadium, and it feels impressive. We've already talked about the downtown code expanding. I agree with everything Anna said. We definitely, there's enough uncertainty about adjoining properties, particularly the scrapyard, where we just weren't comfortable enough with knowing what the future was going to hold and didn't want to rezone it twice. So we've held off and just rezoned the 30 acres that is subject to the development agreement. More uses under the downtown code. I should have made Anna talk about this. You can read what these are. we wanted short-term rentals prohibited over there because part of the idea of neighborhood is to not have it become a de facto hotel zone every weekend through short-term rentals. And we still have short-term rentals, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands in the city. It's a robust business. A few particular things, and I did mention some of this before. Parcel C and G should get developed first. They're the closest to the stadium. They're the farthest along on the infrastructure. Infrastructure drives timing. I'm going to keep saying that. We feel pretty good that we know that Fallon is working hard, very hard on getting these to a place where they can begin development. By the way, I should mention that there's a couple of Fallon folks in the room here today. If you want to talk to them afterwards, where did you guys go? In the back there. Getting closer to the river. These are the uses I mentioned before for parcels D, E, E1, and F. Parcels A and B will be later. Parcel B I mentioned is the trailers, construction trailers. And then parcel A has probably the worst infrastructure challenges that we've got in the 30 acres. One, it's supposed to be a transit hub and affordable housing. There's not much point to a transit hub until we have the East Bank Boulevard. And then it's also adjacent to the 25-foot concrete wall that Anna showed on James Robertson Parkway. And so that'll be I'm sure the last to be developed of the 30 acres.
Hey, Bob, within these 30 acres, I noticed going through the plan that there was the mention of underground parking. I haven't seen any mention of parking in obviously the stadium. What's the parking plan or expectation within this first 30 acres?
Sure. Let me take a little side trip to what Mr. Granberry referenced about. So under the downtown code, there's no parking required. What we find is that people who finance and build buildings, just because they could build with no parking, aren't interested in building with no parking because it's hard to find users with no parking. So the idea of having a zero requirement lets the market set how much they need for the uses of their building. So that's one thing is like there's a certain amount of believing in the market knows where to set the parking for its buildings. And then a couple other threads to blend in here. Just like the number of cars per resident in the Gulch is very different than in my neighborhood and probably a lot of y'all's neighborhood. If having a dense urban environment, it's just going to be less cars per person than what we think of usually in Nashville. And that there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg there, which is why I think it's valuable to let the market decide as we get to different buildings what the parking should be. And the other thing to blend in the mix is part of the Titan Stadium deal is Metro committed to provide for the Titans 2,000 parking spaces indefinitely for event use for the stadium. And so we've got the ability in future years, once some of the sales tax capture around the new stadium deal generates money, we're able to use some of that money to build the parking spaces that we owe the Titans. And so for these first handful of years, before there's anything really built around here to generate sales tax, our objective is to provide the 2,000 spaces with the shrinking surface parking lots that we've got around here. And then opportunistically, as we see Fallon building, we may choose, and we would end up talking to y'all about it, we may choose to, if Fallon on parcel C was going to do hypothetically 3 levels of parking, we would look at, well, what if there's a 4th paid for by Metro, and then that would go toward our 2,000 spaces. We know that we're covered for the next handful of years because we still got surface parking around. We know once there's sales tax revenue, we'll have something to use to pay for it. And between that, we're going to try to be opportunistic to chip away at that 2,000 requirement as we can. That's probably the best answer I can give right now. This is a description of the non-binding MOU that passed through the council. It contemplates the location of E. There'd be a ground lease for 35 years. It says no rent. It was like $10 nominal rent. And then there was 2 extension periods where we would have to, there's a formula in the lease where they would move from no rent to some rent. But it would like 25% of market value, something like that. We agreed to have the building design subject to Metro approval, and the pedestrian bridge. We could probably have a whole session about the pedestrian bridge at some point. But in short, the pedestrian bridge is critically important to getting people in and out of the football stadium. And that's not just for football games, it's for concerts, it's for CMA, it's for everything that goes on over there. And so we've got a hardcore rule that we've told all our partners from Fallon to TPAC to the Titans, the pedestrian bridge is never going to be closed. We're not going to go a 6-month or a 12-month period with no pedestrian bridge. Aside from stadium uses, it's currently the only safe way to bike or walk from one side of the river to the other because of the sidewalk infrastructure on the other bridges is not really safe. It certainly doesn't feel safe for a user with cars going by 50 miles an hour. So one of the things that we've been hard committed on and was in that MOU was that if the pedestrian bridge has to come out of commission due to construction for TPAC, some alternative has to be provided adjacent to it. And we've got options for what that is. And again, we could talk a long time about it. But that's pedestrian bridge is a thing you guys are probably going to hear about several times in the future. And that's all the slides I have. Happy to answer any questions.
There we go. Question. So as I'm looking at that, you said there's a parcel that Fallon is in charge of themselves to develop. Is that right? Is that F or something?
Yes.
F. Yeah. And so as the previous administration was going through the RFP, is that right? Mm-hmm. Was that part of the RFP process, or was that developed after the award of the RFP?
Well, what we inherited from the prior administration was conflicting information about what was supposed to happen with TPAC from a locational point of view. And it was really, what we inherited was 2 things that were not fleshed out. One was we got an RFP for 30 acres, including parcel E. And the RFP didn't say anything about TPAC or Performing Arts Hall. The RFP was separate from that. And then there were verbal conversations between the Cooper administration and TPAC with not a, a lot of economic development happens without any emails or documents or anything, for better or worse. So just being perfectly blunt about it, some people said the Cooper administration absolutely wanted TPAC on parcel E, and other people say absolutely not, never reached an agreement on that.
I get that. Yeah. I'm just saying though, as they bid for the overall project, right? Yeah. In that RFP, was parcel F part of the overall bid that yes. If whoever won it would get parcel F?
Yeah, all these parcels, E1, E, and F, were included in the RFP.
That Fallon would develop?
Yep.
And that includes the E?
Yep.
Okay. And so that's where the what if clause came in if TPAC doesn't get to an agreement.
Yeah, the RFP in 23 that Fallon responded to called for whoever the winning party was, Fallon, to develop E1 and F. Absolutely. And then while we were working on the MOU with TPAC, we told Fallon we're considering TPAC on parcel E. And frankly, there was a long discussion where TPAC wanted to be on parcel E and wanted Fallon on F, and Fallon wanted to be on parcel E and put TPAC on F. And that negotiation was resolved when TPAC offered to cover the infrastructure in the area. And since they offered to pay the infrastructure, Metro concluded that TPAC on E and Fallon on F. But the RFP definitely would have had all of it to Fallon.
E1, E, and F.
Yep.
Okay. And so is there any other parcels that Fallon has as a what if on site, anywhere on the footprint that we're not aware of?
So B, I mentioned briefly. B is where the construction trailers are now for the Titans. Their rights to that are contingent on them hitting milestones for delivery of residential units.
Okay, and that's the only other parcel.
Yeah, they definitely have A. On B, it's contingent on meeting deadlines. On let's see if I can. For C and G and D, they definitely have the rights. And E1 and F, they definitely have the rights. And E is contingent, as mentioned, on what happens with TPAC.
Right. Okay. And that's all the parcels as of now. Yeah. And all that was laid out in the prior RFP that everybody bid on. They knew when they were bidding, they had access to all that. Okay. And what's the timeline for the deal for TPAC? Like I think you said there's a certain time.
Yeah.
So what's that date in the future?
Well, it's starting to seem close, but when we negotiated a year ago, it wasn't that close. It was they have to have finance. I'm going to get the details a little bit wrong. I know the date, but they have to have the financing and have everything arranged by the end of this year. And that was built around last year this time. They were confident that they would get the rest of the money from the state at the last legislative session. And they wanted 1 year as buffer. And so that meant that they would get the commitment from the state by no later than this legislative session and be able to demonstrate the donor commitments by September of this year and be ready to go by the end of this year. And so that was, if they were going to be a go, they need to be a go by the end of 25.
Right. Well, I mean, the state's putting in $250 million. That's what the governor's put in this budget.
Yeah.
But there's other things that have to be agreed on. It's not just the financing. So, like when's the transition from TPAC to Fallon? Like, what's
the end
that
of this
date?
year.
End of this year. Is that just based off the financing, as you suggested, or is it the whole agreement?
It's what we put in the Fallon Development Agreement passed by the council, and it's what we had in the non-binding MOU.
So they have to show the financing at that point, or they have to have agreement with Metro and the mayor's office?
They need agreement with Metro also. Like a year ago, we did not think that we would be sitting in February of 25 and not have an agreement with them.
All right. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Sure.
Bob, what's the effective date or the intended effective date that starts the affordable housing timeline meter?
The development of any parcel, paraphrasing a couple pages in an agreement, but it's basically it needs to be pad ready. If it has utilities access along the perimeter of a parcel, and we've gotten 200 years worth of junk out of the ground around it, then that's when the clock starts going. And then there's a 2-year clock to break ground once Metro presents something that is basically pad ready.
Also curious, you talked about the phasing of Fallon building. When does Fallon get to start building? Is it contingent on the process of the stadium freeing up that first lot? I mean, there was a huge dirt pile on that lot for a while. Like, realistically, and also I know we have to get the assets over here and things like that. So when would Fallon be envisioning that they're starting on the first site that they're able to start on?
So for the dirt pile, the Titans have been a really good partner, and we've stayed in touch about when Fallon would need the dirt gone, and the dirt will be fully gone by the time Fallon needs the dirt gone. But in the meantime, it's a win-win for everybody if they use it to store that. So the Titans are really closely aligned with what the timelines are. Fallon and the Titans are going to be neighbors for a long time, and they've been acting like neighbors, which Metro appreciates both of them for that.
I wasn't trying to disparage the
No,
dirt
no.
pile. I just know physically it's been there.
Well, it's a big dirt pile. It's definitely right in the middle of where development will be. The trigger is whether when utilities are available and there's nothing like if there's some old easements that run through the parcel, for example, that like I know one of them in particular isn't getting used for anything, but like that easement will have to go away in order to give them rights that they could finance. And so it's clearing up things like that and making sure that there's appropriate utilities that touch the parcel. And once that's accomplished, then a 2-year clock starts. I would say that I feel I'm going to try not to put too many words in Fallon's mouth, but I feel comfortable with this one. I'm pretty sure whenever it is that the Titans are able to host a well-known, popular international sporting event, Fallon will want a hotel open there, and so we think they're adequately motivated to stay on target. And the technical and the weeds things are we've got teams of people, lots of lawyers, lots of business people trying to work through clearing things like the old easement, and there's a little communications line that runs across 1/4 of the parcel that we need to agree on something like things like that we're working through. We feel like it's on track.
Something I just want to flag, and you talked about it earlier in the slides, is, we got a lot of crisis in this town that we're trying to talk about and address, but childcare is one that, I'm particularly close to, and I just want to make sure that it's not viewed as an afterthought in the development of this, because how it's situated, what those lease terms look like could, only make the matter worse, and would love to see us engage the early education community, particularly NEEC, and making sure that we really approach childcare thoughtfully for the East Bank.
Yeah, and I can get you more details offline because I don't have them readily available. But Parcel G is where the daycare will be, and we got into some pretty far in the weeds about in terms of what the size of it needs to be, and how it compares to. The rent will be compared to market, and we've got more details about that I can get you offline.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Sure. Very helpful. Next agenda item is to set the next meeting date. So I know Wednesdays aren't great for Mr. Cato. So is there another day of the week that works for everybody? Would Tuesday mornings work? Pulling up my calendar. Sorry. I can't really see it because I don't have my glasses on.
March 25th.
Perfect.
After spring break.
Oh, yeah, that's March. Great. March 25th at 9 o'clock. Does that work for everybody on the board?
Yeah, that's cool.
And does it work for staff? Tuesday, March 25th.
Say 6 a.m.
Well, I said 7, but I can do 6. So we'll do 9 a.m. on March 25th. And then do we want to go ahead and set this as a recurring third, whatever that is, 1, 2, 3,
Third Tuesday.
third Tuesday of the month, or the fourth.
That's the fourth.
So we're going to do the fourth Tuesday of the month at 9 a.m. going forward. Does that generally work for everybody?
Yeah,
Does that work for staff?
That's cool.
Oh, I guess we need to make sure that works for them as well. Okay. So we'll schedule, but does next month work? March 25th work? Do y'all know that? Okay. So let's set next month's for March 25th, and then if y'all, in our heads, we'll have it tentatively scheduled for Tuesdays, and y'all can let us know for going forward on Tuesdays. If we need to reconsider that, we can. And then one more kind of housekeeping matter. Anna, can you give us an update on the email addresses we had discussed?
Yes, so last meeting we were talking about email addresses. I met with Metro ITS. Metro doesn't provide email addresses to non-employees, and so we do have an East Bank Development Authority email address established, which goes to Ben and I as staff for public comment. But if you have a different personal email address that you would like to use, different from anyone you've already provided to me, then that will be your email address that you'll use for East Bank business. But we had discussed if Metro could provide a Nashville.gov email address for each of you, and that's not something they provide. So just make sure you have whichever email you want this business going to provided to me, and I'll keep that updated.
And our email addresses also, correct me if I'm wrong, are published on the website for public communication as well. So make sure whatever email address we provide to you is the email address we want on the website as well. Okay. But then for business from staff as a board, y'all have that one.
So we have, it's EBDA at Nashville.gov and East Bank Development Authority at Nashville.gov. They both work. And that will primarily be for the public. If they have emailed comments on anything they want to send, it will come to us, and then staff will disseminate it to the board.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Are there any other questions or items anybody needs to discuss before we adjourn? Mr. Mendez, anything from you? All right. Then we'll adjourn the meeting and see y'all on March 25th. Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.